Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today on this webinar with Pallet Shelter and the National League of Cities. My name is Annie Osborne. I am a program director on the Strategic Partnerships team at the National League of Cities. And I'm really thrilled to welcome you all here today. NLC works with partners across all sectors because we know that cities, local governments can't and shouldn't operate in silos. They need to engage with local nonprofits, with the private sector to be able to really deliver what their residents need. And so National League of Cities partners with companies like Pallet Shelter to help connect them with cities and to really make sure that residents are benefiting from the resources that are out there. Pallet, I'll let them tell a little bit more about themselves, but they provide transitional housing and shelter for folks experiencing homelessness, as well as good and stable jobs for those in need as well. We have really enjoyed working with them over the last year, and they've really invested in the National League of Cities by supporting our Women in Municipal Government constituency group. They are participating in the Capstone Challenge program right now, working with two cities, North Glen, Colorado and Huntington, West Virginia, to help them create comprehensive plans to address homelessness. And they just are authentic and really engaged partners. And so excited to turn it over to them to tell you a little bit more about them and about the panel today. So I will turn it over to Amy King, the CEO of Pallet Shelter.
Awesome. Thank you, Amy. I appreciate the introduction. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our panel discussion here. We're grateful to have you. As Annie mentioned, we are Pallet. We provide interim shelter solutions for folks that are displaced by homelessness and natural disaster across the country. Had the privilege of meeting some of you at NLC events, but I'm grateful that you joined us this morning. I'm really excited to introduce you to our panelists today, who are not only good friends of mine, but great partners of Pallet's in thinking about how we more holistically address homelessness and the complex problem that it is across the US, not just in the cities that we serve directly. So today we're going to talk about creative pathways to permanent housing, some innovative creative solutions for solving unsheltered homelessness that take on this more holistic approach. So for those of you that aren't familiar, Pallet is really passionate about a couple of things. We are passionate about shelter, and we create panelized shelter systems that go together in less than an hour for sites that can be set up in a day. But in addition to that, we're really passionate about workforce development and opportunities to help people gain economic viability and have opportunities to grow and accelerate out of homelessness in a sustainable way. And as we've grown our impact and reach across the country, we've learned a lot about what needs to occur in order for someone to sustainably exit homelessness and get on that trajectory and that path to a better place. So what does that look like? Well, for us, this looks like what you see here, this reintegration ecosystem. And what we mean by this is, in order for people to sustainably move out of homelessness, they need a complex solution, because homelessness is a complex problem. And not all people need just housing. A lot of people need access to resources, they need social services, they need assistance connecting with their community, workforce development, all of those things. But today we want to really focus our conversation around the two kind of highlighted areas that are standing out. So two of the things that you really need in your city and that we want to help you find innovative solutions to tap into are how you increase housing supply in innovative ways. And we're going to talk about how we do this without having to do permanent development. So this is how to leverage existing properties and opportunities. So we'll learn a little more about two really cool programs that are doing this in a very unique way. And then, of course, social services. So how do we provide holistic, appropriate services for people based on where they're at and their needs? We have one service provider here today with us who is going to tell you about the services that folks that are impacted by the justice system need. So we'll dig into that in a few moments as well. So really quickly, I'm going to give you a quick intro to our panel, and then I'll let them introduce themselves more wholly. So Leah Salavari is our Senior Manager of Advisory Services at Pallet. I'm going to tell you more about her in a second. Patrick Arney, my very dear friend, is the Executive Director of Weld Seattle and is going to talk to you a little bit about the service provider perspective. especially as it relates to system impacted, justice impacted folks. And then also my dear friend, Nicholas Merriam, who's the VP of Program and Operations of Housing Connector, a really awesome and innovative program that is scaling across America. So we'll talk a little bit about that, more about that, what they do in a moment as well. To give you a quick background on LEA's services so you can make note of this. So part of LEA's role at Palette is to help cities like you find partners like Nick and Patrick and folks who are looking to scale their impact or provide assistance to you in creating like programs that they have here in Seattle in your city. So Palette Advisory Services will help you with community consultation, bringing all your stakeholders together, creating a holistic plan, and then helping you address displacement within your community with these holistic plans. So I wanted to give you that background. She'll help you fill out this ecosystem here, basically is the idea. So with that, we're going to jump into the panel discussion, which I will lead here. We are going to have some Q&A at the end, about 15 minutes. So as questions arise for you, please feel free to put them in the Q&A section, and we'll do our best to answer them all at the end here. But we're going to start with the very first question. So I'm going to ask each of the panelists to quickly introduce themselves and their organizations and just briefly explain to you what their organization is doing to create permanent pathways to housing. So Nick, why don't we start with you and Housing Connector?
Fantastic. Thank you, Amy. And big thanks to the NLC and Palette for hosting this really, really important conversation. Delighted to be here. It's always nice to be amongst friends talking about really impactful solutions to homelessness. So first, Housing Connector is heavily focused on housing supply. I think many of us can agree that homelessness is fundamentally driven by a lack of affordable units, but there's also an efficiency problem in the units that we have. And so Housing Connector is on a mission to inspire housing providers to increase access to units for people in need of a home. This means that we put housing providers at the center of our work. We work deeply with housing providers to help them open up this access. I want to tell a little anecdote that'll help highlight this. So there was a study done by the St. Louis Fed, and that study revealed that there are about 2.5 million units that sit vacant on any given day. If we consider the fact that there are about 500,000 folks that are unhoused and are currently experiencing homelessness, that would suggest that there are 5 available units for every person that is experiencing homelessness. Now, you might say to me, look, Nick, not all those units are going to be appropriate for these folks. True. So let's make some assumptions. Let's say 1 in 5 is available. All of a sudden, we have enough units to house every person that's experiencing homelessness here in the US. The way that Housing Connector approaches this problem is by solving problems for housing providers. And the way that we do that with them is we have financial resources and a skilled team that help them construct their business in a way that they can continue to open up access to people that have historically been left out of the housing market. So when we work with community, what we are constantly doing is bringing market forces to the table, bringing private business to the table, and building solutions for them so that they can continue in this path of equity and open doors for folks. It's going to take a really long time for us to build our way into enough supply across the country. But we believe that this process and this solution of making our current systems more efficient, reducing the friction for those people that experience the most friction when it comes to housing is a really viable path. So I'm excited to dive into our model a little bit more later in the conversation. And thanks for the opening question, Amy.
Awesome, thank you, Nick. Really appreciate that context. Patrick Arney from World Seattle, you want to introduce yourself and your organization and tell us a little bit how you think about pathways to permanent housing in the work you do.
Yeah, thank you, Amy. I'm Patrick Arney. I'm the executive director of World Seattle. I want to honor the space, thank the other panelists. Hopefully we can inspire some action. So I think it's important to note that I myself, previously homeless, IV drug user, in and out of institutions, including jails, and And today I'm a husband, I'm a father, I'm a homeowner, I'm an impactful member of the community. So like, how did that happen? It happened with a lot of help. And like, so Well Seattle, what we're about is offering comprehensive support for people reentering the community, incarceration, and oftentimes that looks like homelessness, and oftentimes that is associated with substance use disorder. The housing program that we provide, I knew inherently from my own experience that if you have resources, treatment, and then sober living is considered a full continuum of care for an individual with resources. I think we could probably all agree mass incarceration is a thing. Untreated substance use disorder is a thing, and intervention often looks like jails or prisons or institutions. So we wanted to provide that level of care for people that lack the resources that were returning home from incarceration. Oftentimes the people that we're serving are 2 to 3 years post-release. They would end up back on the streets. It's a revolving door of recidivism. There was a study done by the city of Seattle. 50% of the people that were booked into King County Jail in 2019 were thought to be homeless. So we offer a buffer. Our motto is replacing barriers with opportunities. So people come into our housing program. We partner with Seattle University to provide nursing, get a baseline for people. We have a mental health clinician on staff. We have a work program where we get people back to work. We provide workforce development training, soft skills, hard skills. But the main point of emphasis, I think, and what really inspires people is that it's completely peer driven. 100% of our staff, we have 25 full-time employees. Everyone represents the population of people we serve. And I think that is the recipe for success that I would encourage everyone to consider. Because when you come from homelessness or incarceration, and you're talking to a caseworker and they're like, you got to do this, this, and this, you might have a blank stare in your face. If you're talking to somebody that has been there, that has successfully navigated the barriers that exist to be a successful part of the community, it's a completely different experience. Thank you.
Totally agree. Thank you, Patrick. And thank you for sharing your story with us. I'm so proud of you, and that was an honor to have you share that. Leah, welcome to the panel. Would love to have you introduce yourself and share about your role at Palette and how you think about Palette's role in creating pathways to permanent housing.
Thank you, Amy, and thank you, Annie. Really appreciate the NLC helping to facilitate this important conversation, and also just wanted to say thank you to our to my co-panelists. I really appreciate you being here and looking forward to this conversation. So as Amy mentioned, my name is Leah Azul-Salveri. I head up advisory services at Palette Shelter. And in this capacity, I help play a supportive role to our cities and counties in advancing our Palette Village model, as well as looking at that holistic reintegration ecosystem that really goes beyond shelter and housing, looking at intersections between policy, programs, and projects to help really rehabilitate folks and get them back to where they need to be. Prior to this, I worked for about 10 years in the public sector, and I actually worked specifically in local government and in politics in the Bay Area. So I've seen firsthand some of the critical issues that cities are experiencing and some of those challenges and barriers that exist. So in terms of the ways that Palette addresses pathways to permanent housing, so we have our shelter village model that provides dignity, privacy, and supportive services to residents. We partner with local service providers on the ground to help promote those social services to help transition folks into permanent housing. But as we grow as an organization, we're also always looking for innovative ways to help transition folks into permanent housing, again, looking at those other models. And so in terms of our advisory services work, this really looks like different buckets of work, including funding for programs and services, advancing effective policies, providing living wage jobs that offer meaning and purpose, looking at all kinds of different interventions, things that are best practices across the country, and helping to support folks really where they are. So to give just kind of a concrete example of this, some of the work that we've been doing in North Glen, Colorado, we came in and did a comprehensive community needs assessment. So North Glen is a suburban community that's located about 7 miles north of the Metro Denver area. The city and county actually have a lot of strengths. So some of those strengths include abundant social services. They also are experiencing challenges, probably similar to some of the challenges perhaps many of your cities are facing, including a lack of land, a lack of temporary shelter programs, and over 50% of the residents are cost burdened. So obviously, there's a need to not only look at rehabilitating folks that are currently experiencing homelessness, but also looking at homelessness prevention as a key strategy. So after doing that community needs assessment, doing in-person site visits, dozens of interviews with local stakeholders, meeting with service providers as well, who specialize in housing supportive services and homelessness prevention, we are moving forward to develop that comprehensive regional plan with specific recommendations that the city and county can use to improve their homelessness services. This plan also includes an implementation plan with concrete steps to build more emergency shelter, which is an urgent need in the region. We're presenting this plan to a body of local decision makers, including the North Glen City Council, the regional group of city managers, and the Adams County Board of Commissioners. So again, just to close out, like my colleagues here, Palette is looking at innovative solutions and really working to address homelessness in housing across the full continuum, looking at holistic solutions, things like effective policies and programs that can help move the needle on homelessness, and also thinking really creatively about how we can address these problems by leveraging programs that are working and deeply partnering with our cities and communities and those most impacted by the issues. So looking forward to continuing the conversation here today. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, Leah. All right, so let's jump into the conversation. We're going to give some more, kind of dig into the weeds here and talk about how these program works, give you a little more information. So Nick, let's start with you. First question for you is, can you explain a little more for the folks on the panel how Housing Connector incentivizes and promotes market rate entry for non-traditional renters, and why this model is so effective in breaking down cycles of poverty and homelessness?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. So what we have at Housing Connector is we have really figured out the leverage point for mutual benefit across sectors. And I'm going to dive into this in a deep way. So first thing to understand, so Housing Connector is a tech for good nonprofit. We maintain a housing marketplace embedded in the Zillow app. This is a live Zillow feature that our partners can use to both list a home that might be available for folks exiting homelessness or experiencing instability, as well as for our nonprofit partners to access that. So the way the model actually works is, because we're running a marketplace, we manage two sides of an equation. So we manage a supply side as well as demand side. We do this in any market in which we operate. So on the supply side, which is really where we spend a lot of time and focus and interest, is we work with housing providers and bring them to the table through financial tools as well as customer service support. So we have a team that goes out and recruits properties, and the pitch generally goes something like this. It goes, hey, we can bring you new tenants for your building. These folks have past experiences that you might normally disqualify from your units. We're going to ask you to lower the screening criteria. And in exchange for lowering that screening criteria, we have a financial benefit that you're going to receive. And that financial benefit, that financial package that we have to help mitigate this perceived risk, is it comes in a variety of different forms. One form is rent mitigation. So if this tenant is unable to pay rent for up to 3 months over 2 years, we can step in. If there's a problem, we will be your first point of contact. We have a whole team. Their job is to reconcile issues between residents and housing providers. And so in this way, we've been able to amass a number of properties that are really interested in driving community impact. I think there's this misconception, Amy, that the private sector actually isn't interested in social good. And I think that our model disproves some of that. It says, look, it's not about doing good or not. It's about making smart business decisions. And what they're perceiving is they're perceiving that this risk makes it intolerable for them to support this community. And so in this way, we bring folks to the table. On any given day, we have about 1,000 active units that are on our platform that are ready to receive anybody exiting homelessness. So that's how we manage the supply side. The question then becomes, how do we fill those units? So we partner with existing nonprofits to fill those units. There are no better partners than nonprofit partners. And the reason is that they are already embedded in community. They have case managers, and those case managers have a bunch of people that need a home. Plain and simple. Case managers spend a ton of time looking for homes for their clients. And what we've done is we've created this really easy way for case managers to come into our system and say, oh, here's a home. Here's a place where my folks can live that's in the location that they want, that has the amenities that they want. And the only thing that we ask of those nonprofits that partner with us is that they provide ongoing support for that first year of housing. Now, we see this as a really critical feature of our programmatic model. And the reason it is in that first year, if a person is coming into a new home and maybe they haven't been in market rate housing before, or even affordable housing before, or independent living, they might need some additional support. They might need some workforce development. They might need some access to other resources. And so those case managers are able to provide that. What we actually hear from properties out there that we partner with is we hear that they come and join us for the financial suite of benefits that we're able to offer. But the reason that they stay is this ongoing customer support and case management that provides stability, that makes sure that people stay in homes. So we're only about 3 years old, but we've already housed 3,800 people in that number. There's only about 10 evictions or so. So this model works.
It does. Awesome. Thank you, Nick. That's super helpful. And I know, as a side note, that you guys partner with Weld in Seattle as one of those service providers that provides ongoing services. So this is a perfectly timed and well put together panel in that regard that, well, Patrick can speak to the benefits of this model. But Patrick, let's jump to you quickly now and talk about, so 2 things. One, can you kind of talk about the specific of how Weld's unique interim housing model works? And then tag on to that sort of what that pathway is from the Weld interim housing model into Nick's housing connector model and kind of that trajectory that people progress on.
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Amy. We had a brilliant founder. She initially, so in the city of Seattle, it's not quite specific to our region, but in some ways it is. At any given time, there's about 250 vacant homes throughout Seattle proper, and that's due to gentrification, tearing down old buildings, building condos. The tech sector's moved in over the past 2 decades, and we're seeing a lot of that throughout the city. So what Weld Seattle does is we utilize vacant homes awaiting permitting and turn them into safe, transitional, sober living, dignified living for individuals experiencing homelessness and re-entering the community. There are incentives for that, for property developers. There's a fair market rent write-off at the end of the year. There's a property tax exemption. The threat of squatters is negated, and we're able to come in and turn it into like a beautiful house and be good neighbors and, you know, talk to people. And you would think too, like, that neighbors might not, you know, who's moving in next door. But what we found is that the city of Seattle is #3 in homelessness. We trail only New York City and Los Angeles, and we're a city of less than 5 million of both of those municipalities. So it's a profound problem in the region. So developers knowing they can be part of the solution and neighbors seeing like a solution work, there's a lot of buy-in there. And again, we get people, they come into our housing program, they come directly from institutions, directly from the street, directly from detox, directly from treatment centers, and they're embedded in the program. They're actively engaged in their recovery. There's clinicians, there's nursing partnerships we have, and then we line them up with work. And we know this based on experience what the barriers are. And it's a constant state of replacing those barriers with opportunities for our people. And yeah, Housing Connector is fantastic. I actually probably should have mentioned it during question 1. We have about a 65 to 70% success rate for individuals moving on to permanent housing from our housing program. We take on the most likely candidates for homelessness and recidivism with people with substance use disorder or alcoholism, often in its late stages. So those are profound success rates. And so people stay with us for about a year, so they get wrapped up in services, they get back to work, they're stabilized, they're ready for an opportunity. And we do partner with Housing Connector. We have other contacts throughout the county, and we place them. And the Housing Connector has been a great partnership. Oftentimes we have people moving to an apartment, or they find a house and then move in with some roommates. And I think the biggest part of what we do, and this is, I don't know if this is discussed enough, but like the community, ultimately, the community engagement piece of what we do is probably the most piece, and it's wrapping people up in community. Because what we find is when people come to us, they often can't be accountable to themselves, but they can be accountable to a community. And when you meet people that are homeless and like chronically homeless and used to being homeless and want to stay homeless, that's because of the community they're part of on the streets. So you have to have an equal or greater than solution to that. And we try to provide that there. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
That's awesome. Thank you, Patrick. I think what's really interesting about the pathway that the two of you kind of set people on is that connection point that we've talked about of that ecosystem, right? So it's really important that people, because people have different needs, they're all very different, right? No two people take the same pathway out of homelessness. And so having a collection of services and this integrated model where all these partners are able to come to the table and collaborate together is really a successful model. And we've seen these great outcomes that Patrick mentioned. So Leah, let's jump to you and talk a little bit more about how the role that Palette can play in helping to create these integrated models. I saw somebody already put a question in and said, you know, how can we help find these resources in our city? So maybe talk about how cities can think about this systems integrated approach to homelessness, and kind of who the partners are that they need to be thinking about or that we can help identify to bring to the table.
Totally. Yeah, that's a really important question. And I just want to first kind of, just lift up some of the things that I'm hearing from my co-panelists. Again, Amy, I think you mentioned this, but, just really thinking creatively, really meeting folks where they're at, building programs and supportive projects that really, lift up those that are experiencing these challenges and really just trying to think about how to meet folks where they're at while also leveraging partnerships and strengths within your respective communities. So, just thinking about that holistic system, I really want to encourage you all as city leaders to, again, look at our reintegration ecosystem really as a roadmap. Looking at those buckets and thinking through strategically, how can we address all of these different important elements? Because when we're talking about housing people and homelessness, shelter and housing people immediately is obviously of utmost importance, but it's often not sufficient or truly enough to really get to some of the systemic drivers of these issues, right? As well as to really meaningfully serve folks to get them, reintegrated, addressing all of these various impacts. Because when people are experiencing homelessness, that is an incredibly traumatic experience. So we really need to think about, more than just shelter and housing, right? So when we're thinking about sort of broadly the problem of homelessness in this country, there's many systemic drivers, things like poverty and income inequality, clearly the housing crisis and affordability crisis, racial disparities, social inequities, lack of access to mental and behavioral health care. These are really challenging, sticky issues, right? And so I think when we're building programs, we really need to think about how we can, do our best to think about all of those consequential elements and trying to create programs that, again, just really deeply support people and move the needle on these issues. So just maybe to give a concrete example of this, we've been working with the city of Huntington, West Virginia. And Huntington is a city that, like many, is strapped for resources, balancing many urgent needs. The city and the city at large has been heavily impacted by the opioid epidemic and now the fentanyl epidemic. They've experienced decades of deindustrialization, which has also impacted their housing stock, which is now about 60% of their housing stock is in critical disrepair. So, very, very complex issues. It's a very resilient community, but again, they're just overwhelmed by these growing and overlapping challenges. So after, talking to city leaders and stakeholders, we've identified some critical partnerships. So one of the strengths in the community is they have a very robust and strong public health partnerships between local hospitals and also Marshall University, which is one of the largest economic drivers in the city. So we put together a list of 7 key recommendations for the city. And these were things that, again, touched on that reintegration ecosystem, everything from looking at the lack of regulation around recovery homes, which are currently not always adhering to tenant laws and driving some of the local evictions. So we're looking at that. We're looking at the need for more training and education for first responders, strategies, including policies to help incentivize development. So putting together this very broad roadmap. And then from there, what we're doing sort of operationally is honing in on one program that we want to accomplish together. And that based on some of the urgent priorities, we've decided to move forward with a crisis response team. So this is a team of mental health professionals and law enforcement professionals that are working together to de-escalate urgent crises, things that are happening in the community that, again, touch on the opioid epidemic, that touch on the housing crisis. We are looking at current trends and data and expect that a majority, about 85% of the individuals that the CIT will engage with will be experiencing substance use disorder, homelessness, or actually both circumstances. So this is a great entry point, right, for the city to be able to engage some of those individuals and hopefully refer them to resources and treatment supports to help rehabilitate them. So, just to wrap up again, just one concrete example of some of the work that we're trying to promote. And I think this is a great example, again, of a city that is taking a lot of initiative and really looking at how to lift up some of the current strengths and also address some of the challenges and thinking strategically about how to do so with this holistic framework in mind.
Awesome. Thank you, Leah. I think one thing that's really important to call out, and I'm seeing people are starting to kind of comment and ask questions, which is awesome. Thank you for that. Is that, again, it's a pretty common misperception that new development of affordable or low income housing is the only way that we're going to solve this crisis. And the people on this panel, all of us from experience, can tell you that that's not going to solve the problem, nor is it always necessary, right? That's not to say that we don't need to develop more affordable housing. I absolutely agree with that 100%. But what you're hearing here is these innovative ideas to leverage existing properties that you probably have available, whether it be vacant properties that developers are awaiting permitting on, as well does, or leveraging existing landlord relationships, as Nick's team does, to leverage market rate properties and convert them into affordable units, right? And low income housing in and of itself has a number of challenges related to it in terms of stigmatizing populations and trapping them in situations where they then don't have social capital to move out of those situations. So we want to encourage you to think more holistically and broadly about resources that may be available to you that require a little bit of creative thought and innovation to engage, rather than just assuming that the developers in your community that are lobbying you for development sites, that's the only way. That is necessary, but that's not the only way.
Amy, can I chime in and just speak to that really quickly?
Absolutely.
I think you raised such a fantastic point. And I want to share with the audience here that we are actually now being approached by affordable housing developers to add value and conduct lease ups for them, right? Mm-hmm. So even the existence of creating that affordable housing, they're still looking for additional support through that process. That in and of itself is not it's not quite enough. It's a great and important and critical move, but it's not quite enough. And so I think that anecdote really highlights what you're saying about we can't exactly build our way out of this.
Yeah, thank you, Nick. That's so helpful. And there's a really popular kind of narrative right now that is focusing on homelessness as a housing problem, which it is. I don't disagree with that, but it is not just that. And providing someone 4 walls and a roof will not solve their homelessness crisis. It will not. It's just the reality. And this group has worked with thousands and thousands of people across the country. And we know for a fact that the keys to an apartment do not end the homelessness. There's a lot more than that that's required. So with that in mind, Nick, this has popped up in the Q&A, but it was a question I had for you anyway. So let's talk about how Housing Connector's model started and how you're thinking about scaling to other cities. People are already asking, how do we get Housing Connector in our city? So maybe share a little bit about how you think about that and your growth.
Yeah, happy to. So the first thing I'll say is I'm going to drop my email into the chat. Please grab it, email me after the session. Happy to talk to you, happy to get you connected to the team. So Housing Connector, like I said before, has only been around about 3 years. We're actually not a new model. Fundamentally, we're a landlord liaison program. A lot of communities have these, a lot. They've been around for a while. What's different about Housing Connector is the way in which we approach this model. So first, putting properties at the center of our work and solving problems for them, because we fundamentally believe that if we solve problems for them, there's going to be massive uptick or opportunity downstream, right? So if we can continue to open those doors. 2, we are constantly thinking about scale. We're constantly thinking about how do we make this a really seamless and easy space for nonprofits and housing providers to engage in. I don't know if anybody on the call has gone out and tried to get an apartment lately. It's an ugly process, right? It's not fun. There's forms, there's documentation, there's all that other stuff. Now, if you're in poverty or experiencing homelessness, the burden is significantly more. And even if you put in an application, even if you got all your docs, right, you found your social security card, you found everything that you needed, even if you have all that, there's still great chances that you're going to get rejected because you have past evictions or no credit score or something like that. So fundamentally, the way that we're approaching this is scale and property centered. That doesn't mean that we don't think about the experience of nonprofits or clients and future residents. It just means that we're really focused on solving those problems. So that's kind of the first and foremost piece. We started in the Seattle area. We have expanded, especially around this area. So we're to the county to the north, we're to the county to the south. We've started opening up operations in Denver. And Dallas is just in its infancy, starting to come online. So if you're in the Dallas area, please reach out to me. I'd love to chat with you. The way that we think about scaling nationally is when you look at Housing Connector, because we have tech relationships, tech platform, you might think that it's just a plug and play model. And it's much easier than standing up something from scratch. But what we are constantly looking for is we're constantly looking for two things. One, we want to work with communities that want us there. We aren't interested in trying to convince you to work with us. We're interested in working with folks that want us there. So that's one. Two, we're looking for market conditions where we believe we can be successful. So what that looks like is it looks like vacancy rates. The higher the vacancy rate, the better opportunity we have to be really effective, right? And there's a number of other metrics that we're looking at as we evaluate future markets to move into. So the other thing that I would say is, we are adding system capacity. We are not providing direct case management services. We're not providing direct housing. What we are doing is we are adding system capacity. We're stitching together disparate parts of networks so that they work more efficiently. So, Leah did a great job talking about the complex ecosystems in every city that serve or work to address this problem. And coordinated entry systems, which nearly all communities have, are a great spot for entry into that system. But there also exists this space where providers need to work and collaborate together really efficiently in order to get folks housed. And that's what we do. We make that system more efficient. We bring talent and resources to the game. So thank you for the question, and thank you to the audience for that question.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Nick. That's super helpful. There's a lot more like detailed questions coming in about this, so I'm guessing people are going to reach out to you once you get your email in the chat there. Excuse me. So really important point that Nick made that I want to now kind of transition back to Patrick on is this idea of, Housing Connector is not a case manager. They're not a service provider. In the same way, neither is Pallet. Pallet provides a tool, these, connections to service providers and services that are needed. And then we provide a shelter tool for people that want to do interim shelter sites as well. But really the key driver to success in moving people along and helping them succeed in their reintegration is the service providers. The service providers are key, pivotal parts. And you heard Nick talk about people provide, their nonprofits continue to provide services to the residents for up to a year after placement. So Patrick, let's talk a little bit about the community you serve specifically. They're all folks that are impacted by the justice system and have a history of arrest or criminal justice involvement. And I think most of us know that can be a challenging barrier in housing and workforce, all of those things. So can you speak to what those specific barriers often are, and then the strategies that Weld employs to turn those barriers into opportunities so that people can then excel in their trajectory out of homelessness? Patrick, can you hear us? Did we lose you?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was having trouble unmuting myself. Yeah. There's just so many for people re-entering the community. Bad credit, no credit, untreated alcoholism, untreated substance use disorder, untreated trauma, job prospects is as bad as they were in the Great Recession due to criminal records. So I think it's important to know we have a model called Weld Works that speaks to two things. My own experience was I would be offered positions. I was super excited. I spent probably the first 5 years I was sober in transitional sober living, trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life. And I get offered these jobs. And I was like, yes. In one instance, like I actually put in my 2 weeks notice. I was like painting, put in my 2 weeks notice. I was going to go work at a network operations center in Knock. We're a tech city. It was a game. The day before I was supposed to start, the CEO called me and told me they just couldn't take a shot on me. They just couldn't do it. So we couldn't access jobs. So the opportunity was, there's a labor shortage in the city, and we created a work program to get people out to work and train them on site, and they're getting paid. They come to us on a Wednesday for orientation. We got them back to work on a Friday. We're giving them rides to and from work. We're giving them PPE. We're giving them boots. We're giving them clothes. We're showing them how to be successful on site. And we're putting money in their pockets immediately. And that huge part, you hear about workforce development often, and it can look like a lot of classes, a lot of prep. And we are a work first model. We're getting people actively to work, and we're making sure they're paid for it. And then the hope is that they are permanently placed at the position, and economic mobility is a very real thing for our people. They need to be able to be autonomous and have agency, and that is impossible to do if you can't work. And we are frozen out of not just housing, but workplaces, unfortunately. So there's a lot, and what we've learned to do, I think, and what's most important is we come together collectively as a community. We address these issues like with ourselves and do replace those barriers as best we can, but they still exist. And I think it's real unfair when you see somebody pay their debt to society for a mistake, that they made, and having to keep repaying it every time they go and try to get a place to live, or they try to get access to a job. That's why organizations like NICS are super important. The relationships that we establish within the community are super important. We don't just talk to them, we talk to city council, we talk to the county, we talk to other landlords throughout the city. We're constantly advocating for our people to have opportunities for permanent living and economic mobility. And the final point I'll say is this: there's about 2.5 million people incarcerated right now in jails and prisons, recycling in and out. 95% of them are going to be released. 95% of the people incarcerated today are going to be released. So the question is, what kind of community do we want them to release to? And I've said this a lot, and I think it's super important. I tell it to donors all the time. I tell it to the county, but our ability to foster stories of redemption is a reflection of our collective welfare. So I would encourage everyone on the call to consider that, and consider these stories that we're talking about, these people. They're people. These people that we're talking about, invest in them.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love that saying that I have heard you say that before, and it's so true. And I think another really kind of jaw-dropping stat is the one that 1 in 3 Americans have a criminal history, which is it's a big number, right? And then if you look at the statistic, that's more people in America than have a college degree or a college education, right? So when you think about the populations in your community and the sheer statistics of those numbers, you have more people who need assistance living in your community than you do people who can have the education and the training to self-motivate. And there are educated people who experience homelessness as well. And so it's important to think about the fact that life circumstances can change at a moment's notice, right? And then we just continue to perpetuate these cycles for people. So thank you, Patrick. That was super helpful. I want to jump to a couple of questions that are popping in because we have about 10 minutes left now. So one quick one, somebody asked me how many people are on the call. There's about 96 people that have been tuned in at the highest point during the call. And then that was an easy one, get that one right out of the way. One of the other questions that I think is really helpful is somebody asked specifically, how do we incentivize landlords and vacant homeowners to participate in these programs? So quickly, I'll address, because I'm very familiar with WELD's model. When we leverage existing privately held vacant homes that are awaiting permitting, and when WELD does that, there is an incentive program in the city legislation at the City of Seattle that incentivizes developers and homeowners to donate their house for temporary use to programs like WELD. And we can share that legislation with people so that you can replicate it in your community. But we do not, I want to clarify, we do not purchase these homes. They are used during the period of vacancy, which in Seattle, development can take up to 3 years sometimes. So anywhere from 6 months to 24, 36 months, that kind of thing. So Patrick, did you have something else to add to that?
Yeah, I was just going to say, tomorrow I have a meeting at the fire department headquarters, because the fires are a profound problem within the vacant homes. So we access, houses like that as well. Just like you see the problem and then you address it, and that's kind of how we operate.
Yeah, and then somebody asked as well, how do I identify vacant properties in my community? And the answer is it kind of depends. There's different data systems in different cities to identify those opportunities. Your housing development group at your city probably has that data, but if they don't, let us know. That's, again, a resource that Leah can help with. Also, Nick's team probably has experience with getting access to that kind of data. So we're happy to help you, excuse me, identify those data sources. And Nick, can you speak briefly to Housing Connector? Kind of, again, you mentioned at the beginning, but again, just quickly, the incentives that you provide to market rate landlords to take on folks that they traditionally would not.
Yeah, so our financial package is risk mitigation. So it's up to 3 months rent mitigation payments over the course of 2 years. So a resident comes in, if they can't pay rent because they lost a job, they had a medical expense, et cetera, we can step in 3 times over the course of 2 years. We also provide up to $5,000 in damage coverage. We have a vacancy loss financial tool that we can step in with. So if there's a problem with a unit and that unit becomes vacant for a period of time, we can step in and cover that. In certain cases, we have used a tool called Cash for Keys. So there's an unreconcilable conflict between a resident and a housing provider, and can help bring reconciliation there through that. So those are the financial tools. In terms of like incentivizing folks and saying, hey, if you participate and house somebody, we're going to pay you X dollars ahead of time. We've used those a little bit. They're not actually as compelling as you might think. Again, I would come back to saying, look, the financial tools on the surface feel really compelling, but the reason that people ultimately participate with us, the reason that they stay, is this ongoing customer support. Because what happens, and a lot of housing providers have this experience, is that they bring somebody in, they feel like they might have taken a chance here, and they bring somebody in, and then all the support disappears from that person. So our team is a first point of contact. So if there's a missed rent payment, that landlord can reach out to us and immediately let us know, and we can start the financial process immediately. If there's ongoing issues around noise or other activities that might be new for people living in market rate apartments, we can work with case managers to get those addressed in a timely manner. So I want to make sure that I'm emphasizing sort of the duality here. Just throwing money at this is insufficient.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And if you think back about the statistics we just talked about too, these landlords have just as many renters coming to them with non-traditional backgrounds as they, or maybe more than renters with traditional backgrounds, and they need to fill their units, right? So that in and of itself is a really compelling argument. We can help you find renters so that you don't have vacancy rate and subsidize that concern about liability that you might have, right?
Precisely, absolutely.
Yeah, awesome. Leah, a question for you that's come in. Somebody was asking how Palette thinks about wraparound services at our site. So do you want to speak to that a little bit and how we provide services for those in our shelter programs and think about those continuation of services as they move on?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So as Amy mentioned, we provide our shelter products. We don't actually run the sites ourselves. However, what we typically do, and we have about 100 communities across the country now. So what we typically do is partner with local service providers on the ground. And there's a couple reasons why we do that. One, often these are the folks who already have a lot of history and deep trusting relationships with people experiencing homelessness. So therefore they're often the best poised to be able to run and manage sites. But we have a couple of ways of supporting them. So we do have in-house staff that kind of help play the role as a liaison and help, just making sure that our service providers are well taken care of, that, if there are any questions in terms of any ways that we can support, or, sometimes if there are things coming up with our product, maybe they need a window repaired, right? We have a direct staff person that helps play a supportive role to our service providers. But typically the service providers in the wraparound services that they're providing consist of a lot of different things, right? So public health, getting folks document ready, obviously the day-to-day management and oversight of the villages themselves. We also have something new that we launched recently called our dignity standards. So this helps ensure that all of our sites have sort of a foundational element of different services, that people's basic needs, hygiene, toilets, water, all of those things are taken care of, that there's security. So there's a lot that really goes into this village model. And I think, part of what really makes it successful is that, again, there's really, we're providing the privacy and dignity that people need to have their own unit. So getting them, rehabilitated and stabilized, and then they're met with those wraparound services, including often housing navigation, which is another critical piece, particularly when we're talking about, getting people transitioned into permanent housing, right? So they're met with those wraparound services to be able to then transition into permanent housing. Just as sort of an aside, another thing that we often see, just sort of speaking to this question about affordable housing and sort of thinking creatively about different types of exits. Often one of the common exits that we see is people getting restabilized, maybe getting their substance use disorder issues treated, things like that, right? And then they're able to have a family reunification and actually, reconnect with their family and find permanent housing that way. So again, I think, just touching on this theme that I keep harping on, there isn't a one size fits all solution here. Part of what our villages do is try to meet that, right? Try to think about holistic solutions. But again, really ultimately, it's that deep partnership with the service providers on the ground to help assess individual folks' needs and get them restabilized and transitioned into permanent housing. And often, that looks very different for each particular person and even for each community across the country. So happy to answer any follow-ups if there are any, but hopefully that answered the question.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Leah. That was super helpful. And I think it's important to remember, and somebody asked a question as well about, how do we connect people with affordable housing units when what we hear is there's not enough affordable housing in our community? It's a great question. And we hear this all across the country, right? At Palette, I know that Housing Connector, they hear it as well. And I think the reality is, again, the idea of why we wanted to do this session for you guys is it's a common misperception that people have to go to existing entirely 100% low income or affordable buildings or products. And the reality is there are other sources of housing supply in your communities that you may not be thinking of, which is fine. You have other things on your plate as a city official or a staffer, but that's why these programs exist. We want to help you think creatively about identifying those opportunities to leverage existing space without just going through the traditional routes that exist, right? And you've heard a lot of really interesting ideas and concepts here today, hopefully, to kind of get those creative juices flowing. I know all three of our panelists have put their emails in the chat for you. Please feel free to reach out to them if you have follow-up questions or you'd like more information. I have some people asking about Palette's dignity standards or more information about Housing Connector. Please reach out to the folks here. They're happy to send you that information in detail and engage with you to help you think more creatively and holistically about how to address homelessness in your city. So again, thank you for joining us today. We're so grateful that you're interested in helping the most vulnerable in your neighborhoods. I think, Patrick, I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself and finish again with that awesome quote that you always say, because I think it's important for us to remember that in helping the most vulnerable in our communities, we're also helping ourselves. And it's such a beautiful thing. Can you say it again? Can you remember what you said?
Yeah, I can. I said our capacity to foster stories of redemption is a reflection of our collective welfare.
So beautiful. So thank you everyone for joining us. Go out and help the people in your community who need it. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.